IONIQ Information.
Hello, I've been driving our second-hand IONIQ Electric here in the UK now for more than 6 months, and I'm quite convinced it's a good car. But what's my point of comparison? What's my frame of reference to know that? I've mentioned in earlier videos that this is not our first electric car. We had a Nissan Leaf before this, and before that we had a Nissan Note, a petrol car, and that was the first car I'd ever bought. All my life I've lived in cities. Nowadays, my frame of reference tends to come from rental cars or hire cars that I drive when I'm on work trips or sometimes, for family reasons. The most recent ones I've driven have been in the United States. These have included a Kia Soul petrol car and a Ford Focus, which is quite different. The US model is quite different to the UK model for that. Then most recently, I've driven a Camaro Super Sport convertible in the US, in and around the sort of San Francisco area. Then most recently I drove a BMW red convertible. It was a 430i model, petrol, 4-cylinder I think, about 250 horsepower, 8-speed automatic gearbox. This was for about 2,000 miles in California. On the first holiday my wife and I had together, just us, in over a decade, so that was great. Apart from that, I've test driven most of the electric cars that are available for sale in the UK, from the Twizy and the Zoe, and I've been in e-Golfs, and I've driven the Tesla Model S, I've been inside the Model X, and my neighbour has a Kia Soul EV, so I've experienced that, and I've also test driven the BMW i3, so I have a kind of reasonable experience of some of the kind of, not really affordable, but some of the lower priced electric cars too. So it's not as if my frame of reference or my points of comparison are only other electric cars. Admittedly, I'm not, sort of super wealthy person, so I don't have, experience of supercars and driving all kinds of things. Like I say, I've driven one of the very high performance, the Tesla Model S P90D Ludicrous. I've done 0 to 60s in that on test drives. And, I have driven these two kind of mid-level, I guess, convertible sports cars. And the one thing, that I'm sort of found most interesting about those, I did enjoy the sound of the V8 Camaro. It had kind of an amusing sound, and it was nice to drive around without the top in parts of California. The one thing I really noticed this time driving the BMW convertible was the handling. I'd never driven a BMW before apart from the i3, which handles okay, but it has body roll and, it doesn't feel that sort of planted and secure in corners. It doesn't feel like it's going to go off the road, but it doesn't have sports car handling. I've made a previous video about this IONIQ Electric to say that even in sport mode, it doesn't kind of handle like a sports car. It doesn't have, firm suspension or adaptive or responsive suspension to that. All the sport mode does in the IONIQ Electric, as you can see from that video, is just change the kind of the throttle response really. And sort of sharpen that up a bit, but then it has a bit of torque steer in the IONIQ Electric because it's a front-wheel drive car. So as I say, what really impressed me about this BMW, and I have a newfound respect now for BMW's kind of engineering, is the handling. So we were on some very twisty roads here and there, up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and there are some very windy roads, with reasonable speed limit. And I really enjoyed it. My passengers maybe not as much so, particularly my friend Scott sat in the back as I was exploring, not really the handling limits, but at least some of the handling fun of this BMW 430i convertible. And it really made me wonder, firstly, why is there not an affordable convertible electric car? I know in the UK we wouldn't have much use for it, but in the States there would be more use for something like that, particularly in California and more of the sunnier states. And also, why does the handling have to be so kind of middle of the road on these kind of electric cars, the mid-range ones that are available in the UK? I do find the handling, the last Tesla Model S I drove had quite nice handling. It stayed very flat in the corners and was quite fun to drive, but it's a very big car, particularly on UK roads. So something like the IONIQ is the right sort of size for UK roads, but the handling it's okay. It's not, there's body roll. You kind of feel as if you're being sort of thrown around in the corners if you start to sort of steer a bit more enthusiastically. And it just made me wonder, I'm not an engineer in suspension designs and so on, but what is holding this back? Is it to do with the weight distribution of having the battery at a particular point in the car? I know in the IONIQ it's kind of under the rear seats and under the boot or the trunk, so that might affect the handling. And I've read some things somewhere, or heard some things, that the suspension is not the one that the IONIQ hybrid and the plug-in hybrid has. It's a simpler suspension setup in the back of the IONIQ to accommodate the space for the battery. But it's just one of those things. I really enjoyed driving the BMW. It did have some kind of hybrid mode that meant it was a little bit more fuel efficient, but I think the fuel economy is not great on that. But the one thing it made me yearn for, I was quite happy to get back into the IONIQ Electric. I just wish it handled just a little bit better. You know, I'm not a sports driver, I'm not a fast driver, but it was enjoyable to have this experience in the BMW, handling very well. And I just wish they could bring more of that into electric cars, really, make them a bit more fun to drive. I don't understand why they have to be so sort of basic on that level. The other thing I should mention about the earlier experience of last October, driving this Camaro Super Sport, was just the fun sound, really, of the V8 engine. I giggled every time I got into it, much to the kind of annoyance/amusement of my colleague. But then again, things like the BMW i8 and even the Jaguar I-Pace has shown, you can just pipe this kind of sound in with speakers. You don't really need to be sort of pumping out fumes to get that kind of sound if that's your kind of thing with a car. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this kind of short video about my experience of driving cars other than the IONIQ Electric and how I kind of feel about comparing them and the different features. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? If you drive an electric car, does it have any things? It's got a lot of upsides, I know, in terms of running costs and low environmental impact and so on, and low noise and all these things. What do you think about it? Does it have upsides and downsides that you think about? Does it handle well, your particular electric car? Does it leave it, feeling a bit lacking in that area, or braking or acceleration or other things? Or do these things not matter at all to you? Is it just sort of secondary? I'm very much in the sort of camp that the IONIQ Electric's very, very high efficiency is something to be applauded. That's the kind of area that I think technology development needs to go. But let me know. Let me think. Tell me which cars you're in and what you like about them, or which cars you've driven. And so as I say, I just wish the IONIQ is a great car. I just wish it handled and had a bit better steering feel and so on, to just make it a little bit more fun when you're driving it. And that driving that BMW convertible kind of made me realise that that's missing a bit from my driving experience. Not that I'm complaining; it's a great car, the IONIQ Electric, but that would be a great addition if that comes in. Maybe the KONA handled like that. I'm not sure from the reviews that I've seen from it so far. But it would be nice to see a bit more attention to that. I know that there's compromises between the technology and the batteries and the price and so on, but hopefully that's coming in the future. Okay, so subscribe if you want to see more videos. Thanks for watching, and bye now.